human beings, if it were not for their condition, would be laughable. They would be, because of the silly things that people do. And they are silly only because in our human condition we can't see the larger picture. And there are millions of people, Christians and other religions, who look for God in miracles. They look for miracles. I was thinking, about Sabbath school this morning, and the question came up, do we do this because we have to for salvation, or we do this because we don't want to upset the thinking of the other person? And so Jesus said, look, I don't have to pay tax, but I'm going to. So he sends Peter down, the fisherman, to go catch a fish. And when you stop and think about this, you don't know whether to laugh or cry or exactly what. I mean, how did Jesus know this fish had a coin in his mouth? And so you and I are left with some choices in this matter. Oh, well, Jesus worked a miracle and put the coin in the fish's mouth. There's another possibility. And the other possibility is his heavenly Father put the coin there and then told his son about it. And his son told Peter about it, and Peter went and got the coin. Now, this could have worked all kinds of ways. They could have found a coin in the Walmart parking lot. They could have found a coin on the street. They could have found... Why did Jesus work it out this way, or the Heavenly Father work it this way? I want us to think about this for a minute.
So they know that Jesus did it.
There's a mystical side to all of this. But the disciples really didn't know how to think or act around Jesus. They're out in a boat. Storm comes up. These fishermen had lived on the Sea of Galilee for their lives. They knew what storms on the Sea of Galilee were like, how they could blow up all of a sudden and whatever. But this one was a killer. The storm blows up, and Jesus is asleep. We've done this. We know the story very well. But you have to see the reaction of the disciples once Jesus has said, "Be still." And he goes over to go back to sleep and take a nap. But what was the response of the disciples? Do you remember what manner of man is this? What's going on here? That even the wind and the waves obey the voice of a man. Do they fully understand yet who they're dealing with? Who's in the boat with them? No, they don't. They don't understand yet. And Jesus had a way of using their darkness of mind, their lack of understanding. Jesus had a way of using it to advantage. And so he would share parables. Here's a crowd of people out there, and Jesus tells a parable, and the disciples are over here listening, watching, and Jesus waits until the people are gone, the crowd is gone. And then the disciples came to him and said, "Look, we don't get it. What are you talking about?" And Jesus gave this answer, and this is what I want us to get a handle on. He said, "When the people are around, I will speak in parables. I will leave them and the Holy Spirit to work out what the parable means. When the people are around, I will speak in parables. But when the people are not around, I will speak to you." Do you know the word? I will speak to you what? Plainly. Plainly. In other words, there are things that happen in my presence that are a conundrum. They are a mystery. They are something that you can't get your head around. And it wasn't just the people out there. It was the disciples themselves. Now, what happens with humanity, and this develops over a period of time, what happens with humanity is you read these stories and you say, that's a miracle. Well, tell me what a miracle is. A miracle is what happens when holy people are full of God's holiness. And so we make saints out of sinners. This is done, it doesn't matter if it's Christianity, doesn't matter if it's Judaism, doesn't matter if it's whatever. We revere the fathers, we revere the saints, and we hold them up in our thinking so that everything that they do is wonderful and of God. So how is this played out in ordinary life? Well, if you have a Catholic background, there are a million ways it's played out. Here is a nail. That nail must be one from the cross. And you have people who will go on migrations. They will go on journeys. They will walk for days and days and days to get to this place where there's a nail from the cross of Jesus. And just seeing it is a miracle. Just being able to see something that is authentic is miraculous. Now, I'm not making fun of anyone. I'm not poking fun at anyone. What we're talking about is human beings. How people down here on this rock, when they see miracles, or what they presume to be a miracle, how they respond. So there are millions of people who once a year go to Jerusalem and they follow in the footsteps of Jesus. They call it Stations of the Cross. And what they want to do is systematically go from this street to that corner to those steps. And just by following in the footsteps of Jesus, you are blessed. Now, my question, before we go on here, my question is, are the people really blessed? Or just by believing are they blessed? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say both.
Yeah. If a person truly believes something, does that affect the body? Does that affect the mind? And the answer is yes. Now, I'm in a very familiar passage here this morning, and this is where I want us to begin. So if you have a Bible handy, I'm in Matthew 24. We want to just start in verse 1 and just a few verses into Matthew 24. In verse 1, I'll give you a moment to get a Bible handy there. In verse 1, Jesus went out and departed from the temple. Now, it's kind of unfortunate that this is broken by a chapter there. The chapters and verses are not divine. They are made, human beings made to make things comfortable so you can find a verse and find a chapter and find a story. So the first verse of chapter 24 is a follow-up to the last verse of chapter 23. So I want you to take a look. Jesus has made a pronouncement in 23 and verse 38, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate or empty," the margin reads. "For I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth." From this time forward, this is Matthew 23 and verse 38 and 39. Okay? I'm trying to get you back so you understand what the first verse of 24 is about. So verse 39, this is red lettering. This is Jesus speaking. "I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth." Now, we don't use that word henceforth. But from this time forward, or from now on, "you shall not see me till you say, Blessed is he that comes or cometh in the name of the Lord." Now, what is this a reference to? You say, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." Come on. It's the great day of the Lord. It's The kingdom of heaven has arrived. The king has come. Heaven is here. And Jesus is talking to a group of people who are not going to see him again, some of them, many of them. They're going to live and they're going to die, and the next time they see him, he's coming in the clouds of heaven. It's resurrection time, okay? So verse 1 of chapter 24, this is a follow on. So Jesus went out. They're at the temple. Jesus went out, departed from the temple. His disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you see all these things? I'm going to tell you something. Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here. Now here is right there where they are, at the temple. There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. We have to do a little bit of history right here to get the picture. If you spin the globe, you will find the works of men on each continent. You will find something that men have done in the way of a temple to the god or gods. All right? You can talk about the pyramids in Egypt. You can talk about buildings in South America that have stood for thousands of years. And the stones are put together in such a way that you can't even slip a sheet of paper between the stones. And these places are earthquake country, over and over and over again. The temple that's under discussion here is very much in earthquake country. When I went over a few years back, 30, 40 years ago, to the Middle East, I saw the ruins of great temples and buildings that the Romans had erected and the Greeks before them. And most of them are scattered in pieces. You can tell the columns are still standing in some places. And the reason all these buildings are broken down and scattered the way they are is not because a war came in and the war, you may kill people, but you don't push 50-ton stones over. That's work. Okay? And yet here are these great ruins scattered. Now, we're talking about the temple. And Jesus said, you see these stones? The great stones of the temple is how they were addressed. You see these stones? The time is coming when not one of these stones will be left standing atop another. And how many thousand years of earthquakes have occurred from that day Jesus is talking until the present? 2,000 years. Are some of those stones still standing? Yes, they are. So there's evidence that the effort that was put forth, the great stones of the temple, are still standing, some of them. Now Jesus obviously is referring to some time, some situation, some circumstance. How about some earthquake that has not yet occurred, because he says these stones are coming down. Now you and I would like to understand this better. And the disciples wanted to understand it better. So let's look and see what's going on. Verse 2, you see these stones, you see these things, I'm telling you, they're coming down. Now here is the response from the disciples, his own disciples. Remember, they want straight answers. If they want straight answers, the people cannot be surrounding them. They have to have a private conversation. Let's read verse 3. As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him, what? Privately. And they said, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming, thy coming, and of the end of the world? Now, did Jesus say it's the end of the world? No, he didn't. He's describing something that is coming that would have to be the end, because these great stones have stood for 1,000 years in Jesus' time, And now they're still standing 2,000 more years. And so the question is this the end of time? Let's see how Jesus puts this together. We see how the disciples are putting it. This is the end of the world. Verse 4. So Jesus said, "Take heed that no man deceive you. Many are going to come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many, and you're going to hear of these things, these signs taking place." And then in verse 8, Jesus sums it up and says, all these parentheses things, all these are the beginnings of sorrows. Now what is the beginnings of what? Go back to verse 3 and see how the disciples put it together. Tell us, what shall be the sign of what? Your coming. Now, did he say that here? Yes, he did. Back up in 38 and 39. You're not going to see me anymore until you say, blessed is he that comes. So the disciples are picking up on the conversation, and they're saying, this must be the end of the world and your grand coming, your grand return. So how can we know? So Jesus says there are going to be signs, and then all of these are the beginnings of sorrows, and then these other things will follow. So I want to get you and me in a place here to understand the disciples say these events have to be the end of the world. How can we know when you're coming back and when the end of the world is at hand? All right. Let's put this together with the book of Daniel. Why the book of Daniel? Why don't we turn there, Daniel chapter 2, and see if we can reconcile some things that may answer the question of the disciples. By the way, before the disciples said, how can we know? Daniel is asking God about visions and dreams that he or the king are receiving. And Daniel, again and again, is asking God, how can we know when all of this is going to end? That's the same question the disciples had posed. How can we know? So in chapter 2, very familiar passage, we're not going to read. We're very familiar with the passage. There's the great metallic image. Now, when I first became a Seventh-day Adventist, or interested in becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, the evangelist was holding meetings in a tent up here in Bessemer, Alabama. And the preacher really wanted me to be baptized. I was an early teen. And so he tricked me. Okay? I really was not that interested in becoming a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. I was already a Christian. I was a Baptist. I believed that I had followed Scripture and followed Jesus, and I had been baptized. And here these Seventh-day Adventists were working on my case to try and get me to go on and be baptized again into the Adventist faith. I really wasn't interested. But the preacher tricked me. And he came knocking on the door of our house, and he said, Mr. Charles, he said, I've got a problem, and I need somebody to help me out. And here's the situation. We have the tent set up down there in Bessemer for evangelistic meetings. Have you seen the tent, Mr. Charles? No. Why don't you come go with me a few minutes, and we'll drive down, we'll have a look. So 10, 15 minutes, we're in Bessemer, and the tent is set up. And on the platform, you're sitting down here, if you're part of the audience, you're sitting down here, and then there's a platform up here, so that the evangelist is up in front of everybody, easily seen. And here on the platform was an image of this great metallic man. This was totally new to me. The Baptists don't talk a lot about it. I see this image. They had painted it and cut it out of plywood and all this kind of thing. And so the pastor says to me, says, Charles, we can't stay here around the clock. And we need people to come and shift somebody to stay here in the tent so that no vandalism takes place and whatever. And I guess what I'm asking you is, could we hire you? Oh man, could we hire you to watch the tent for a few hours a day? Now, what was he doing? Was he worried about vandals? Or was he trying to trick me to be there to hear the preaching?
In many places, you'd better have a watchman.
Yeah, well, you needed one, but they could have worked all of that out with the Bessemer City Police, and you understand what I'm saying? He said, we need somebody to be watching for us for so many hours a day, and we'd be willing to pay you something for your time. Now, it did not cross my mind that tonight the evangelist is going to be there and he's going to talk about this image with a head of gold and silver and that didn't really cross my mind. But about an hour before time for the meeting to begin, the evangelist comes in and other folks with him, and who are you, young man? And he says, I understand you're watching the tent and the things here for us. Yes, sir. I'm glad you're here. This is going to be an exciting presentation tonight. This is my first introduction to Daniel chapter 2. And I could not move. I was riveted. And the very first Bible study I gave, once I had become, quotes, an Adventist Christian, the very first Bible study I wanted to give to anybody was on Daniel chapter 2. A great place to start. Now, how was the statue of Daniel chapter 2, how was this worked out by Adventist preachers and evangelists? The head of gold represented, come on, Babylon. I didn't know much about Babylon, but that was some ancient empire. And the next one was Babylon, and then the Medes and the Persians represented by the silver, and the Greeks, and then the Romans, and you understand. Now, years have come and gone. I'm still fascinated with the dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar. For some reason, in my youthfulness, I thought the dream was given to Daniel. Well, it was, but not first. It was given to Nebuchadnezzar. It would take years for me to say and reason, wait a minute, Nebuchadnezzar is the guy who tore down the great temple in Jerusalem, who literally threw it down to the ground. Every stone thrown down. But you see, that was several hundred years before Jesus, and he's looking at a different temple. That's the one Jesus was talking about. All these stones that you're looking at right now, something is going to happen, and every stone will be thrown down. So this is a different temple. And I was absolutely fascinated that God, through the prophet Daniel, I was looking at it as a vision given to Daniel. It was, but secondarily, it was given to this wicked king Nebuchadnezzar, who hated the Jews and hated God and tore down the temple and robbed it of all the treasures and other things. It never occurred to me that God is giving the dream to this pagan king. I thought it's Daniel. Do you understand how we revere people and we make them larger than life? The larger than life in this is Nebuchadnezzar. Anyhow, you're acquainted with the record of Daniel chapter 2. And let me remind you of verse 28. Because the king is mystified. He's terrified in one sense, but he's mystified by this dream that he's given, and he can't recall the dream. But it was such a troubling to his mind that he would wake up and couldn't go back to sleep. And so he calls all of his wise men in and he says, you better tell me my dream, because I believe it's from the gods. And we've read the answer of the wise men. They said, "Oh, king, there's no king. There's never been a king who would ask such a thing of their wise men and counselors. We can't give you an answer until you tell us the dream." "I don't remember the dream." "Well, how do you expect us to remember the dream?" So God is taking advantage of this situation. And Daniel is one of those in the school of the wise men. He's not a wise man. He's in the school as one of these captives brought from Israel. And God is taking advantage of this situation. And Daniel finds out, I'm on the hit list and so are my friends, because Nebuchadnezzar has made it known and made it known again that if you don't tell me, if you don't bring me an answer, if you don't reveal the dream to me again, then I'm going to have your heads. Now you would think that the wise men, quotes wise men, would be making up stories. The problem was the king would recognize that's not the dream. So God has reached down into the human condition and set a stage so that a person as unknowing as me in that tent, I'd never heard of this stuff before, never seen these things before, these Adventist people are talking about. And I'm mystified. Well, the king is not only mystified, he's terrified, because he believes with everything in him that this is from the gods, plural. And finally, Daniel is begging the man who has charge of Daniel and his friends. And he says, please go to the king and tell him that we can pray to our God and we believe there's an answer. So you know the story well enough to know that that's what the officer did. And the king said, okay, I'll grant a little time. What was the little time granted for? Come on. What did Daniel say? But we need to do something. We need to pray to our God, singular. We need to pray to our God and ask him for answers. And Daniel's version to the officer was, there's a God in heaven that reveals secrets and makes known. So we get to verse 28. If you're open to Daniel chapter 2, I want you to look at verse 28, please. This has been overlooked for hundreds of years by Christians and even by Adventists. I think I'll read verse 27. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded, cannot the wise men, astrologers, magicians, soothsayers show unto the king? They are, quotes, wise men. Daniel says, but there is a God in heaven, singular, that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, what shall be, let's get the setting, what shall be in the what? Latter days. So whatever this golden image represents, it has something to do with the latter days. God has shown the king what shall be in the latter days. Now you and I don't use the expression latter days. We say the same thing the disciples posed to Jesus over there in Matthew 24. How can we know that the time has come? The end. How can we know when the end of the world has come? So we're in chapter 2. The context is the latter days. The first dream, if you will, that is given in the book of Daniel is given regarding the latter days. Chapter 12, let's turn there for a moment, very quickly, and see what the last dream or vision is given through Daniel. So we're at the first and we're at the last. In a few moments, we'll look at the in-between. I'm in chapter 12. I don't know what heading you have under chapter 12, but this Bible says the time of the end, which is accurate according to the context. So at that time, at some time, which is discussed in verse 45, the previous chapter, last verse of chapter 11, at that time, specific, at that time, shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to the same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one found written in the book. That's a study unto itself, what delivered means. Are we talking about just delivered right there from somebody who wants to harm you? Or are we talking about delivered from this present evil world and delivered because heaven has come to pick us up and get us out of here? Anyhow, verse 2 says, many of them, not all, many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. They that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Now I have a question for you. This is clearly speaking of a resurrection. Clearly, many of them that sleep in the dust shall awake, but not all of them. So chapter 12 of Daniel, the end of this book, is telling us what Revelation makes much clearer, is that there's two resurrections. The resurrection unto what? Unto life. And the resurrection unto what in Revelation? Damnation. Verse 4, Daniel, I command you, the angel says, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. It's his book. Even to the time of the what? All right. The context of chapter 12, which is the end of Daniel's visions and dreams and so forth, even to the time of the end. Many will run to and fro, knowledge shall be increased. In the plain English for that phrase right there, many shall run to and fro, knowledge shall be increased. What it actually says in modern English is, many will turn back and forth in your visions, and knowledge or understanding of your visions will be given in the context of the time of the end. Knowledge shall be increased. Daniel said, I looked and I see this angel who's standing above the earth and above the waters. And I want to get you to verse 7. Because Daniel has gone through visions and dreams for years in Babylon with various kings at various times. And here he is, he's an old man, and apparently this is going to be the end of his prophetic ministry. And we come to verse 7, chapter 12. Look at it, please. I heard the man, the angel up above the earth and the sea. I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swear to something, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, that's 3 and a part years, according to the margin. And when he some power that is being reckoned with in the visions. And when he shall have accomplished to shatter or break the power of the holy people. Now, in the context of the book of Daniel, the holy people are the two witnesses. In the context of Daniel and Revelation, the power of the holy people, that's where we started off talking about people, human beings. If somebody sees a vision, experiences a vision, sees a miracle, works a miracle, then they are holy people. So Daniel has this angel in front of him, and he said in verse 8, I hear what you're saying. I've told you all through my book. I hear what you're saying, but I don't understand it. And so I'm going to press you again on this matter. I heard, but I understood not. And I said, O my Lord, what shall be what's the next word? Come on. Look at it. Verse 8, I heard, didn't understand, and I said to the angel, O my Lord, what shall be the what? End of these matters. It's better than things. And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until what time? The time of the end expression here at the end of Daniel's book is equivalent to what shall be in the latter days in chapter 2. I'm reading this in English. It was not spoken in English. Okay? So I am at least once removed. Depending upon the person who is translating this from the original writings, it was either spoken in Hebrew or Aramaic. Now I'm twice removed. You understand? I'm reading it in English, but I cannot, because of one language to the next, I cannot see it in the plain, simple sense that it's given. And so I have to understand, because of my background in college and seminary, I have to understand that, wait a minute, I know you're reading it in English, but there's more to the story than you're seeing. Well, maybe it's Hebrew, and the historians are not exactly agreed as to whether it was in Hebrew or was it in Aramaic or was it in Greek, because the book of Daniel, we had to go and get historical documents, and we didn't have the whole book, so we got some in the Greek Septuagint, we got some from the Aramaic, and we got some from the Hebrew, and now we're going to, one removed, two removed, three removed. And can language get mixed up in between just one person and the next person? Forget about 3 times removed. See? And the answer is yes. So if we're going to get the straight of it, we're going to need some help. And what help is promised? Listen to Jesus. Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, and in the context, Jesus is talking about the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. That's what's promised. We call it the latter rain. Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into what? Come on, what does it say? He will guide you into what? All truth. Now, what truth is he going to guide us into? He will show you things to come. That is the opening of these things that are locked up. That's what's promised. The 3.5 years in these books are the 3.5 years at the end. Now, the disciples said to Jesus, how can we know? Now, from my vantage point, I want to talk to the disciples who are asking Jesus. Thank you for asking the pertinent questions. The questions any of us would ask if we could, and getting some answers. But I want to tell you this, Matthew, from my perspective. I'm 2,000 years down the road from Matthew. Matthew, I want to tell you something. From my perspective, Jesus is telling you and the other disciples, look false teachers, look for earthquakes, look for wars, look for all these things. But he's really not talking about you guys. Are they prepared to hear that? No, they're not. Now, I'm down here, fellas, and I want to tell you that I'm 2,000 years distant from where you are, so you guys are off by about 2,000 years. At least 2,000 years. That would be insulting. It would not be, let's say it would not put God in a good light. We're here asking you privately, we're looking for straight answers. How can we know when this time has come? And you're telling us, and now you're telling us, but you won't be around, guys. They're not going to go preach. They're not going to go and lay down their lives for the preaching of the gospel. They're not going to do that. They have to be convinced that Jesus is talking to them and that these stones of the temple are going to come down in their day. Did any of them come down in their day? Come on. This is about 30 to 32 A.D. And when did the Romans tear down the second temple?
Maybe some of them were alive. I don't know.
We think Paul might have been around, and maybe, but mostly no. Paul wasn't around. He's dead in 62 to 65. John is about the only one who's going to be alive when the time comes. Okay, but what I'm saying is God is treating the disciples the same way He is treating Daniel and his friends. I'm going to tell you some things, but I'm not going to tell you everything. I'm not going to answer all of the mysteries and all of your questions. I'm not going to do that. God is too wise to do that. So in 70 A.D., after a 3.5-year hiatus, the Roman soldiers returned. They came, and 67.5 A.D., they came, surrounded Jerusalem, and then in a mystery left. And 3.5 years later, they came back, surrounded Jerusalem, and burned it to the ground. More than 1 million Jews are historically estimated to have been in Jerusalem and put to death. More than 1 million Jews. Not only was there destruction of the people, there was destruction of this great stone temple. The Romans finally said, we've had it. And the Roman soldiers believed that the gold that was inside the temple, and there was gold inside the temple, was there for them to take. And they had set fire to the city and set fire to the temple. And the gold was actually melting inside the temple and running down the walls, running down the cracks in the wall and the floor between stones. And so the Roman soldiers, with evidently huge pry bars or whatever, are turning one stone after another over to get the gold that they believe has melted and run down between the stones. Now, the evidence is left of what they left and didn't tear down. And those great stones, there's still several hundred of them still standing atop one another. So what can we reason? What can we surmise? That what Jesus said to look for when this time comes, not one stone will be left standing atop another. And when that happens, all these things that I'm telling you about will mean that the time of the end has come. So let me do this and we'll close. People call me and they really don't understand, and I understand they don't understand. Because you have to put pieces together. It's like a puzzle. If you don't understand which piece fits where, then the whole thing is not making sense. And I say it needs to make sense. So why does this have meaning for you and me? This actually is 3 and a part according to the context, but let's do it this way. And there are 1,260 days. There are 1,290 days. According to Daniel chapter 12 that we looked at, there are 1,290. Now I'm trying to put the pieces of these prophetic puzzles together. I'm trying. And you and I don't have much longer to wait and find out if there's anything to this. This is the 12 months of Daniel 4. Daniel 4 is about what person? Come on, Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar. This is the second dream given to Nebuchadnezzar. Is Nebuchadnezzar a good guy or a bad guy? Come on. What? Well, he did some bad things. But according to Daniel chapter 4, God sees something in Nebuchadnezzar that's worth saving. Gives him the first dream. Now we're talking about the second dream. And it's very specific. The king is going to boast arrogantly that he is responsible for all the goodness and the wealth that is in front of him. And when 12 months are done, he stands in the palace and says, look at what I've done. I take responsibility for it, and I am great. He's saying, let us make Babylon great again. At the end of 12 months, the king was in the palace, boasting, and a voice from heaven is heard saying, at the very time he is boasting, cut the tree down. Who does the tree represent? According to the prophet Daniel, who does the tree represent? King Nebuchadnezzar. There's no guesswork in here. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar lived about 3,000 years ago, 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. How can this be about the time of the end? Because Nebuchadnezzar is a stand-in. He is a type of the end times. So, with considerable trepidation, I read and I read and I read and I read Daniel 4 and I read Daniel 4 and I read Daniel 4 and I said, you know what? This belongs to the time of the end. That's what it says. And it's the end of something. Here is the something. The end. It's not the end. You are going to lose your position. You're going to lose your mind. You are going to... Does it say you're going to die? Doesn't say that at all. It says you're going to lose your standing among men. And how much time is going to follow this change, this event of how much time? 7 times are going to pass over you. And you will not regain your sanity and your position until the end of the 7 times. Now, we have discussed this repeatedly, that 7 times in biblical counting and reasoning could be 6 plus a day, 6 years plus a day, 6 years plus whatever. So when we say 7 years, it's not necessarily 7 literal years. It's 7 prophetic sanctuary time years. And this is where I want to get you, right here. This is the end of something and the beginning of something else. And Jesus says, all these things are the beginning of sorrows. So, here we are, you, me, us, here we are. If there's any truth to Nebuchadnezzar and the 12 months and the present time, we've got about 3 months left. As a matter of fact, they said that on the news yesterday afternoon. You've been in power, Mr. President. You've been in control of the White House for 9 months. The point of it is, we do not have long to wait, you and I, to find out not so much about President Trump, but to find out if you and I are this last generation. To find out if you and I are the targets of the time. So this is what I have decided. I have decided that I want the time of the end to come, but I don't want to be in it. I want the bad people to be part of the time of the end, but I'm a good people. I want the time of the end to come. Why do I want the time of the end to come? Because I want Jesus to come, and I want to get out of here, and there's a whole lot of other folks who want to get on the train with me. Okay? Okay? Now, here's how Jesus puts this together for the disciples, because the disciples are... And then he says, but